Someone told me yesterday that this church was just a CYA church. And I said, no, it's not. You know, we come here and all these kind of people from different parts of different communities come here and we make our own. It's really nice. So as August said, I grew up in Meadowview. I'm a child of this church. In fact, I'm almost certain that when I'm in the church, I'm still a child. No, really. You know, they always ask, who's going to light the chalice? And I kind of want to volunteer. But standing in front of all of you kind people, my elders, adopted sets of aunts and uncles, my parents, it feels a little strange. Yet standing here as a child is kind of full circle. Today, I am tasked to share my experience as a Peace Corps volunteer in Honduras, to share with you the friendships that taught me that protecting our children is crucial to change, and that by giving more to any type of change, we always end up gaining more for ourselves. So I joined Peace Corps in February 2010, left the wintry wonderland of the States and went to Honduras. Better? Joining Peace Corps was something I had dreamt about since the start of college. The idea of going to a developing world, working in a foreign language, and sharing skills was the original appeal. Not to mention the goal of promoting world friendship. What a fit for a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed college grad. I was so interested in the lives of people who had so little compared to us consuming Americans. What drove them to start every day? How was I going to learn how to communicate and bridge these cultural barriers to create something meaningful, to create sustainable change? Well, these ideas felt useless when I arrived in Honduras with 50 other volunteers and remembered exactly 3 words in Spanish. I was really regretting the advice of not practicing more Spanish that first day when I didn't even understand the pronunciation of my name. But thankfully, I was not alone. Formed by John F. Kennedy 50 years ago, Peace Corps trains American volunteers in cultural, language, and technical skills for 3 months before pushing them out into the towns in which we work for 2 years. Working in 76 countries, Peace Corps works in education, health, HIV and AIDS, the environment, business development, and agriculture. Before I begin my story, I think it's a little important to share some facts about Honduras. So a little bit of this is dry, forgive me, but it's important to understand the circumstances to get to know the people. So get out your pencils. Welcome to Fast Facts about Honduras. I'm so happy for whoever put a map in here. This is wonderful. So Honduras is in Central America. There's Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and El Salvador, Honduras in the middle, followed by Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama. It shares a coastline on the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean. Discovered in 1502 by Christopher Columbus, it was controlled by Spain until 1821. The current government has the longest-running constitution, formed in 1982. This country is considered a democracy, but that's still debatable. 8 million people live in this subtropical country, slightly larger than Virginia. 1 million people live in each of the 2 largest cities. The capital, repeat after me, Tegucigalpa. It was just a test. And the manufacturing city, San Pedro Sula. Half the population lives in rural communities. The majority of the population are mestizo, which means mix, and they're primarily Catholic or evangelical. No UUs there. Although 90% of Hondurans speak Spanish, there are still some tribal languages, primarily the Afro-descended Garifuna on the north coast, popular for their dancing. The Mosquito on the Mosquito Coast, where roads are replaced by rivers and cars by canoes. And the Chorti, in my part of Honduras, Western Honduras, the descendants of the ancient Mayans. Honduras is the 3rd poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, preceded by Haiti and Nicaragua. The per capita GDP for 2010 was $4,200. Compare that to the United States, $48,000. 20% of this money comes from the 1 million estimated Hondurans who have emigrated to the United States. 26% of it comes from industry, textiles and apparels, what we Americans like to call sweatshops, sugar, cigars, wood products, foodstuffs. 13% of it comes from agriculture. Honduras exports coffee, bananas, shrimp, tilapia, corn, fruit, basic grain, and livestock. 65% of the population lives in poverty. Half of the economy is tied to the US, and Honduras was hit especially hard by the recession. Income disparity is so prevalent. The Gini coefficient, measuring income equality, is at one of the highest, at 55.3, on a scale of 0 to 100. 3.6%, so less than 4% of the national budget is spent on education. The adult literacy rate is 83%. Most adults went to school for 6 years if they went to school. The UN Development Program estimates that this is getting better, and 80% of children are attending school between 9 and 11 years. Honduras' recent past has been plagued by devastation and political instability. In 1998, Honduras was devastated by Hurricane Mitch, a storm that destroyed 70% of the crops, injured 12,000 people, and killed an additional 5,000. The loss and damage associated with this storm was $3 billion. I'm standing here today and telling you about this storm that happened 14 years ago because in the country you can still see its effects. More recently, in June 2009, the Honduran president Mel Zelaya was ousted in what the US called a coup. Although elections were held the following November, Pepe Lobo, the current president, has faced many problems in gaining acceptance from fellow nations. According to the State Department and the UN Development Program, the human rights situation in the country significantly deteriorated in this time. And that's where I come in. I got to Honduras in February, just after Pepe Lobo was elected in November. After 3 months of training, I was deemed by Peace Corps, trained up, and sent out to fend for myself. I was assigned to work in Copan Ruinas. Copan ruins, to all you gringos. Copan is home of the ancient Mayan ruins in the eastern range of the Mayans' domain. The Athens of the New World, said archaeologist Sylvanus Morley. The ruins, famous for their intricate carvings, are visited by 100,000 people a year. Copan is the most visited town in mainland Honduras. The town is filled with hotels and restaurants to cater to all these people. The reason I tell you this is to eradicate this image of a typical Peace Corps volunteer, waking up in a mud hut and taking a bucket bath every day. There were volunteers in the country who didn't have electricity, many who didn't have running water, but not I. I had hot running water and Wi-Fi. My main job assignment was to assist rural communities with their water system. The bulk of the work was designing new water systems and repairing old ones. I also helped strengthen the capacity, development lingo, of villages' water communities, groups of men and women who take care of their communities' water systems. Basic water systems in Honduras are really basic. They have a spring source at the top of the mountain, PVC pipe that's laid underground and goes to the top of the highest hill near the community, where a distribution network puts a faucet at every house. The entire systems are gravity-fed. Pumps don't work in developing nations. I also worked in chlorinating water at a community level, something that's not very common or done very often. Old chlorination systems, and those that you see in Honduras, require a town plumber who usually can't read or write to measure the flow rate of the water entering the tank, and then measure the granular chlorine he needs to put in to mix it. It just doesn't work. I worked with a new technology. A simple tea addition had a slow drip of water that dissolved a tablet of chlorine, like the one you have in a pool, which was mixed in the tank. These were really successful, and it was nice to work on something that was successful. The installed chlorinators actually reduced diarrhea and gastro illnesses by 50%. Aside from chlorination and water treatment issues, Honduras has fairly reasonable access to water for the developing world. And I mean that even the poorest of poor and the richest of rich have access to water, or have hope of access. The biggest problems I encountered was a lack of continued education to maintain these systems and a lack of funds to fix any problems that arose. Copan is home to a local Rotary Club, and this proved key in the success of my projects. Through Rotary, the local government, an international non-governmental organization with whom I worked, we built and provided maintenance for several community systems. And as great as it was for the town to have a token gringa working on all the land's water problems, the only way positive and sustainable coordination happened was when there was great relationships between Hondurans and myself. But these relationships, of course, don't develop overnight, and I spent the first year trying to build them. I didn't expect the relationships I would build, though. Rotarians from the States, wealthy Honduran business owners who wanted to give back to their community, campesinos, or farmers, all men who lived on less than $7 a day for their family of 6. Assigned first to this government organization and then to this NGO, I spent a couple of weeks doing office work or designs, and the remaining in the mountains with the campesinos. In my picturesque town, all one had to do was cross the river to the south or the mountains to the north and find adobe houses with dirt floors, women carrying watering gourds up from streams or rivers, and barefoot children running in the dirt street, dodging cars, horses, chickens, and one another. Every day was different. The first day I spent in the mountains may have been the worst. Having been struck by dengue fever the week prior, my body was weak. On top of that, I had not been accustomed to walking 20 kilometers a day, or cutting beans in a hot field, or carrying 50-pound bags of cement straight up a mountain. But all my campesinos had done just that, their entire lives. That first day, after hiking up to a pressure breaker box, halfway up a water system, not even the entire way up, and walking down what I still claim to be the steepest and longest hill of grass I've ever seen, I had to give up. But I couldn't admit to these men that this gringa couldn't keep up. So I did what any respectful adult would have done. I lied. I had a meeting in town. I had to get back. But my favorite days, those became the days when I pulled on my rubber boots, packed 2 Nalgene's full of water, and left town at 6 a.m. with a truck full of campesinos. We walked to look for leaks in a water line, to map out where new systems would go, to look for nearby sources of water. My favorite campesino was Don Martiniano. We worked together for a year and a half, looking for a new water source, and then evaluating its feasibility to improve a 35-kilometer water system to provide access for 7 communities. We walked a lot. The first day I met him, Don Martiniano was with his 6-year-old son. I started a long walk in the fog. I was struggling in my rubber boots in the damp grass, and this little kid was just running back and forth. And after 4 hours, after the sun had dried up all that moisture, and to the best of my recollection was slowly killing us, the sun was still running. I made a mental note. If I ever thought that I was in shape, to remember that moment. This kid had energy I'd never seen. Once, when he came out on the wrong hillside and was seemingly lost, Don Martiniano whistled, and his son popped up 300 yards away, ran down the hill and then back up. How was this possible? And then I realized that in so many ways, and probably more ways than I realized at that moment, that I would never be as strong as these men, and that was okay. After a year of walking in the mountains with Don Martiniano, it got better. I learned that Don Martiniano's whistle was his unique call. If we were walking along a ridge, and his friend was on a neighboring ridge, all he would do was whistle out, and we'd meet in the valley below for lunch. Don Martiniano worked on 6 different farms, but when I called to say that I could work the next day, he was always available. When a water source was located, evaluated, and deemed feasible, we found that the only way to get access to it was to buy the surrounding land. Well, there goes that project, I thought. But Don Martiniano proved me wrong. He got every single house in those 7 communities to give $25. $25 from families whose monthly income is dangerously close to that number. The mayor contributed $650. I walked to the mayor's office in late March last year and joined representatives from each community. And I watched as they counted out more lempiras than I'd ever seen in my life. And I knew that we had some work ahead of us. When I found out in December my fellow volunteers and I were being abruptly taken out of the country, I sobbed. And I cried, not for my impending change, but for the people I was leaving behind. I thought about Don Martiniano's commitment to his children and to his community, working to ensure that they always had one of their basic needs met. And I saw him right before I left. He was sitting in the Central Park waiting for me. His phone had died, and he figured if he waited long enough, I would just walk by. His silent whistle, I guess. He was sitting with 2 of his sons, and I sat down with them. And I told him I'd done my best to ensure that the project was going to get finished. My colleagues in town were aware, I said, as were my friends in the States. He said he knew it would be okay. He never thought a girl, a gringa at that, could ever work as hard as I did. And even if I wasn't there, I would continue to work for him. Even when he should have been the one being comforted, he was comforting me. There are Don Martinianos in every community who build toward their future. What good fortune I had to meet mine. Well, coming home has been an interesting change. A couple people use the word interesting, and I mean it in both a positive and a negative way. There is so much stuff in America, and the beans and tortillas are not the same thing. There are deadlines that need to be followed. Is this a good or a bad thing, I ask? But oh, the developed world. Freedom of press, impeccable infrastructure, committing to something and following through. Leafy greens. Oh yes, the land of the free does have its delights. And just as leaving for Honduras 2 years ago was hard, returning to America is just as difficult. I left a town where my identity was my own, a place where the most unexpected people taught me some of the greatest things. A place where I knew the mail lady, the grocers, the pulperia owners, the street sweepers. I've returned to this place in the mountains where I've known the people who filled these roles my entire life. And as similar as all these people and places are, something has changed. I think it's I who have changed. And maybe people get that. I get asked a lot of similar questions. What's the thing you miss the most? Well, afternoon cafecitos and hiking in the Honduran mountains with my campesinos. Easy. What do you regret? Nothing. What's the most shocking thing you saw? Income disparity and the long arm of America's development. In a town with dirt roads and stick-and-mud houses, homes were equipped with TVs and sound systems. And to drink for dinner, not a 1 or a 2, but a 3-liter bottle of Coca-Cola. Is that how the world has interpreted our American dream? And there are more questions. How have your thoughts, opinions, or attitudes changed on immigration? Completely. In fact, so much that I don't even think there's time to fully answer that question. But I can give you a hint. Arizona doesn't have a clue. And finally, the most important question to me, what was your biggest realization? To which I answer, our communities in need are those in which we live, those in which we know our neighbors and our grocers and our mailmen. But these communities can be completely different. They could be 4 blocks in New York City. They could be 8,000 people in Western Honduras. Or they could be this humble hamlet in the hills of Virginia. And just because I'm not physically in that beautiful little community of Honduras doesn't mean I'm not still a part of it. Funnily enough, the communities we build learn to bridge geographical boundaries. And that still doesn't quite answer the question, what was your biggest realization? And I say that our ability to work together helps every member of a community. Maybe that comes in deliverables, food, water, shelter. But more of the time, it comes in things you can't see. It comes in those invisible ties that bind our friendships together. That golden nugget of reward that by giving, we always end up gaining more. And the knowledge that our communities we build are not just for ourselves, but for our children and theirs afterwards.